You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. I am your not-so-normal host, Jacoby Gaylord, and I'm here with Christian Babcock. How you doing, Christian?
Doing fantastic. Feels good to be on the other side of this co-hosting event.
This episode 152, by the way. I don't know if I've already said that, but today we're going to be doing something a little bit different other than me leading this thing off. Today, we are going to try to have a little bit of a unique podcast that may or may not pan out, but we're going to give it a whirl anyways. Basically, this little, this story / message has a meaning, I promise, but you just got to hold off and stick to it, or at least I think it has a meaning, but we're going to try it. And we just figured this would be a fun little silly podcast to do before we kick off Deer Science Month, which should be coming out after this podcast. Christy, you want to tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're going to play a trailer for Deer Science Month at the end of the podcast, and you guys have to stick around to hear it. But we brought on some of the most respected whitetail biologists from across the country, from the MSU Deer Lab in Bronson Strickland to Matt Ross at the NDA. A lot of other folks, more PhDs than I've ever talked to in my life. They probably won't talk to us again, but we definitely tried to speak to them. And we're covering every sense of the whitetail biology. So we're covering hearing, sight, smell, taste, all of them. And with the goal of making us better hunters by understanding more about whitetail biology. That's the goal of the series. It's going to be a month long. We're calling it Deer Science Month. You guys will have to wait till the end to hear the trailer, though, but it's going to be pretty awesome, if I do say so myself.
All right. So to try to kick this thing off, and it's going to be a rough start, guys, I promise. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're going to compare how hunting is today versus how it was a few hundred years ago. And recently, I know me and my third grade reading level, and this is honestly a third grade reading level book. I read a book the other day, Christy. I don't know if you...
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
First one since high school.
It really is. That's a sad thing. Not even high school, I don't think. But it was called Hatchet by, I think who's the author? I want to say Paulson, but I don't think that's it.
Dr. Seuss, maybe?
No. I've read all his books. I already know.
Hatchet, you said?
Yeah, it's Hatchet. It's something Paulson. And I want to say Brian Paulson, but it's not Brian Paulson because...
Gary Paulson.
Gary Paulson. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So it's Hatchet by Gary Paulson. In this book, it kind of made me think a little bit. I've read it before when I was probably like in middle school, and I remembered I liked it, so I wanted to pick it back up. Anyways, it's about this boy who goes to visit his dad who lives in the like somewhere north of Canada, like north in Canada. And as he was flying there in this little biplane, the pilot has a heart attack and the plane goes down in the Canadian wilderness. And it kind of made me think like how the book went on about how, like his first kill that got him food, like sustainable food, how much that meant to him and how it was so different from him just, having dinner made for him that was sitting on the counter by his mom and stuff like that.
Or DoorDash coming to your house.
Right, exactly. So that kind of made me realize, or at least think how we're overcomplicating things within the hunting world, right? And so with that being said, I kind of want to put ourselves in, I guess, Brian's shoes per se.
Before you get into this, there is a show on Netflix that I thought about. It's called Alone. And basically the whole premise is they take 10 people, they take them to, like you're saying, like a remote Canadian or Alaskan wilderness. They drop them off. The last person to leave wins.
I think I seen Joe Rogan interviewed the winner of that.
Yeah, Jordan is his name. And it was so crazy it's just an incredible show. And you realize how mentally tough you think that you are. And then these people got on the show. It's like day one, these guys were like, probably lasts like 300 days or something. And then there's just one guy that rolls his ankle and he's like, help. help. He medevacs out.
Is it still on Netflix?
Dude, it's still on there. There's only like one season
it.
on there, but it's the version of hunting that they're doing on that show is so different. Like
it is.
The version of hunting that we are having is barely hunting in its purest form. It's more like just assassination for a trophy in a lot of ways. And I don't know, you can't appreciate that pureness of hunting until you actually need it. You need the meat for a different kind of reason. So maybe I don't even appreciate it in its fullness, but I think this is a really cool concept.
Any of us do.
So this is going to be us talking about like if we went on the Alone show without going on the show.
That's a lot better way to put it than my book reference.
Some Netflix guy already came up with this idea.
Well, good for him. I just want a little bit of royalty. But anyways, to try to make this more fun rather than just saying, oh, how bad we are as a hunting culture, we're going to try to make this more fun. So just primal weapons only. You get like one primal weapon, right? Like whether it be a spear, a longbow, or whatever you want to, just 5 items. And it could be a lighter, it could be a knife. What's your 5 items? If you were to think off the top of your head.
I would suck with a spear. I know that. I'd end up like throwing it into a rock and breaking it or something. So I definitely take a bow and arrow just because if it has to be a primal weapon, I want something with a little bit of range. Like 30 yards is still going to probably be your max range, but I feel a lot better about getting to 30 yards than a spear distance. And I'm not going to be one of those guys like Tim. What's his name? Tim
Wells.
Tim Wells. I'm not going to be sitting in a tree waiting for something, to come below me and spear it. So I would probably definitely take a long bow. A lighter would be fantastic. Some sort of a kindling would be great. Some sort of bottle to hold water, whether that's a primitive bottle or what. And I'm trying to think.
You can bring items, but just like your primary weapon has to be primitive.
Okay. I definitely would bring some sort of purifier bottle for water, just because I feel like the boiling water thing always gets people. Eventually you see it on these shows where they're boiling water for the first few days, and then at the end they get so dehydrated, they're like, I'll just drink it. I've watched Man vs. Wild. I've watched Bear Grylls. I watched Dual Survival. I love these kind of shows. So that, and then probably some sort of fishing line and hook. So
how many items is that? I think you have like 13.
No, that was like 5. I got a fishing set or just line. I can work with that. I got a primitive bow.
You got a spool of line, no hooks, right?
Spool of line, primitive bow. I have a lighter. I have a purifying bottle. And then what else did I say?
You said some sort of kindling, but...
Yeah, some fire starter.
Okay.
Yeah, what about you?
So I would also stick with your primary, because I was trying to trick you when I threw out spear, because you'd be like, oh yeah, spear. Well, the thing is if you had something sharp, you could make a spear, I think, pretty easily. So it would just be a wood, and you wouldn't have like any point, I guess, unless you could tie a sharp rock onto it. But I would say your same primary. I would bring a knife, like one of those big like, not a machete, but one of those like big army knives, that your dad used to store away, or just anybody's random dad used to store away in like a gun cabinet or an old box that had like the compass on the back.
Oh yeah.
And all that stuff. One of those. So that's 2. I would definitely bring a lighter, 100%. So that's 3. And then I think I would bring a tarp, which would be 4. And then 5. I would say a spool of fishing line too, because you could use that to tie stuff and also try to somewhat rig it into a fishing thing, possibly. So yeah, I think those would be my 5.
What about for water? What are you getting for water, old son?
Oh dang! Yeah, I didn't.
No, you can't take it back.
No, well, yeah, I didn't even think about the pot. So
all right, so we talked about the 5 things that you're going to bring, and I convinced you to. Did I convince you to bring a water bottle or no?
You convinced me to replace a pot with. What do I want to replace a pot with, though? I'm going to say replace a pot with the tarp.
Okay, fair play. So let's say you hit the Canadian wilderness, your plane crashes like your book or whatever scenario we want to play out here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing you're going to look for? Shelter, fire, food? What are you going for?
Water? I don't know. So I know your body can, now this is just dumb bro science. I know your body can live longer without food than without water. But to have the fresh drinking water without puking your guts up and pooping yourself, you need clean water. So with that being said, it kind of leaves a predicament, right? Like, because part of you wants to get a lay of the land, and it also depends on like what your goal is, right? If your plane crashed, you probably want to stay around the crash site. If you're just dropped off for the show, let's just go with that scenario, like dropped off in a show. So I would think my first thing would try to take a brief walk, depending on what time of day you're dropped off, a brief walk around the area, just get a kind of a quick lay of the land, right? And kind of see what you're working with. Because if you try to just, as soon as you get dropped off, okay, let's make a shelter. Well, that shelter could be at a very inefficient, like, I guess, location.
Yeah.
So I would go off. I would make a lay of the land, trying to get like, where could I possibly get food? Where could I possibly get water? And then base my shelter off around there. So that's the first thing I would do, just lay the land, I guess. What about you?
Probably, man, I'm probably going to be hungry, but I don't know. It's like we talked about in the hunting scenario the other day. It seems like it takes you about 3 days to get keen to your senses and where deer are, where small game are, where all this other stuff would be. So I feel like trying to get food immediately would be not a productive effort. Like I just don't think it would be. So. And like you said, building a shelter immediately would be also dumb, because you're going to build it and then you're going to be half a mile away from where you really need to be for all your resources. So probably water. I'd probably try to find water first, and then I'd immediately after that try to establish a fire, because whether it depends what time of the year, but insects away, fire's amazing. And you could boil water if you needed to, but I plan on having my purification bottle. So not a problem for me.
Gotcha. Okay. See, well, that's kind of where I went with the pan instead of just the live straw or the purification bottle, whatever you're going to bring, is because with the pan, you can boil water, but you could also use it to cook. And like, yeah, you could cook it on a hot rock, I guess, or just hang it over the fire. But that would almost be like a mental break, I feel like. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I actually have a utensil used to cook something that kind of reminds me of everyday life back home.
Of home. Reminds me of home. Yeah.
I mean, more simpler times. So once you got to lay the land and you got your water, you built your shelter, what would you focus on for food wise? Would you be more of a hunter gatherer where you're just kind of scouting, maybe looking for some berries, depending on what time of year, what year it is? Or would you focus more on actually furry critters?
Well, God made my palate not being a gatherer's palate. I can't eat vegetables.
That.
I know, dude. I think about it sometimes. I'm like, what would it really take? How hungry would I have to be where I'm like, I'll eat an onion? Like, pretty hungry, dude. Pretty hungry.
For people who don't know, Christian and onions are like, they're like the opposite of yin and yang, right? Because I remember a lot of times we'd run through McDonald's whenever McDonald's was cheap, and he'd be like, hey, I want, a McDouble, no onions, no pickles, all that crap, whatever you don't like. And if it would have those little bitty, like, minced up onions in it,
can't stand them.
He wouldn't eat it.
It's disgusting.
So, yeah. So what do you think it would take for you to, like, you say that, but I feel like at that point, like, you got to think of the mindset, like, hey, I'm not going to have anything else to eat. So if you see a wild onion there, just ready for the picking, if they even have freaking wild onions up there. I don't know. This is how dumb we are.
Jake, I swear to God, it would take double-digit days for me to eat an onion.
It would not.
I swear to you.
The mindset, something would change where you would eat that onion and you'd be like, and it'd be like eating a freaking orange.
Dude, I promise you, it wouldn't. I promise you. Like,
no way.
I promise my stomach would be like, and I'd be like, no, not an onion.
Okay, so what's the first thing you would do? Because you're hungry, your stomach's growling, you're can't think of really anything else except food.
Yeah,
What are you doing?
I think snares would be small game would be my first avenue. So I know that you can take. There's a certain type of trap that's pretty interesting. It's like you prop up a rock and then you take a stick and you use that stick to prop up a heavy rock, and you can rub like, I know a lot of folks have used like peanut butter and stuff on these survival shows. You could put like any jelly or jam if you found a fruit, and just rub it on there. That's one way. Because what happens is rodents or small game come and they hit it over and the rock smashes them.
You think that's one? Just a strawberry tree with jars of jelly?
There might be a berry. You walk far enough, you're going to find a berry. So something sweet, and maybe, heck, dude, maybe I'll get hungry enough where I'll eat a berry myself. But that, and then snares for like rabbits and that sort of stuff. I'm not a small game connoisseur, so I don't know exactly. I feel like I'd have more success on the rabbit or on the stick fall over method than I would a snare. But that would be my short-term goal, and then my long-term goal would be to find something that is a little bit bigger and more sustaining, because you need fat, dude. You can't survive just on protein. That was one of the issues that Jordan was running into on that show alone. Was he had all the meat he could want from killing a moose, but he was starving because he wasn't getting enough fat and enough calories, because meat is not super calorically dense. Like you can eat a lot of meat, be super satiating and full, and not be eating a lot of calories.
See, that's something I like. That would be a good segue into something else I want to discuss later on in this podcast. But for now, we'll hold off on the how far you use the body, right? Because just the meat, sooner or later, we're going to segue into that. But so you would venture. So that's what you're saying. You would set these rock traps, and then what would you do? Like,
I'd check them every day.
Every day. Okay. So what would you do in the meantime?
I'd be fasting. Yeah. I would rock. I would try to eat some sort of wild berries. The issue is going to be identification. I have no idea what's poisonous and what's not. And I'm telling you, my diet now is probably 50% carbs, 20% fat, 30% protein. So I have no idea what I would do to fill those carbs. I know I would be getting headaches from lack of carbs. And so that would be it for me. I'd be protein and fat on the way out there. And I think that could be one of my downfalls in a situation like this, is not eating stuff that I don't want to eat.
You see, that's where I would think I would try to differ. Like anything that I would think is edible. So if this was 200 years ago, if I was born 200 years ago, I'd be one of the first ones to die, because I would be like, oh, hey, I want to eat this berry because I need to eat something. And then I'd end up croaking over. But that being said, I feel like almost any berry, right? Like, granted, I'm not like a plant biologist, or anything like that. But wouldn't you think that like it would take a significant amount of berries to kill somebody to actually poison them? So with that being said, what harm would it do? So I have a lighter, so I would have water, right? So if there was a lake of some sort, I could hydrate myself. What harm would it be to try out certain types of berries in a small amount? And if you get sick, you don't just absolutely gorge yourself where you're just like immensely sick. You take a small amount, you puke it up. For the most part, like that's out of your system. Or you could have diarrhea, and then that would potentially cause like dehydration. But if you have water there for dehydration, now obviously you're burning a lot of energy doing that, but that would be my take on it, is to try to see what I absolutely cannot eat and what I can eat. And I would kind of test that at first while I still have that storage, and it's like the fat storage, and it's still somewhat like early where I'm not like, lost X amount of body fat. And then I'm trying to eat this stuff. I would try to find out what I can eat, what I can't eat, and go from there. And I guess I'd have a hunter-gatherer start, but then I would kind of do what you said with the fishing line. I would have a different approach than just the rocks. I think with the fishing line, granted, I guess it depends what type of fishing line you bring, but I think I would try to make certain snares out of the fishing line. I don't know if it would hold. They would probably chew the line super quick or something like that, but I would test that out. That way I'd have something almost working for me. Like, I guess you could call it like passive income in a certain extent. Like you have something working for you while you're actually doing that. And I think if your shelter and your water is good and you obviously have fire because I have a lighter, that would be my only focus, is just food at that point.
That's a fair point. What would your long-term, obviously you're going to have some long-term meat, because a fish here, a fish there, a rabbit here, a rabbit there is not going to do you for a good amount of time or help you develop any long-term food storage like smoked meat, jerky, anything like that.
Which I have no clue how to do.
Yeah. Did you say you'd bring a bow?
Yes.
So what would your strategy be on big game? Because obviously you're going to start with small game, better, maybe more availability. Let's say you're in the Canadian wilderness. You have caribou, you have some sort of deer, you have moose. Like how much of your energy are you going to spend trying to chase something like that?
Well, I think after I stockpile, like obviously berries would be dependable, like on how quickly they go bad and you just can't eat them anymore. But if I had a safe amount where I knew like, hey, if I'm not successful on this hunt, I could come back and eat berries. At least I won't like absolutely starve. After I kind of had a little stockpile or something, or a good little patch of berries that I know I could go to, and the snares were out, which you would check frequently on the lay of the land, you could kind of go track wise or maybe sign or scat or whatever, what all would be there to hunt big game, kind of like you were saying, that sustainable meat that you could actually somewhat preserve if you had the know-how to do. And that's what I would do. I'd just start with tracks and see what's in the area, and then go from there and try to make a game plan. And sooner or later, I think after living there for enough time, you could kind of get the lay of the land where you would possibly think of things like, is my camp in the right spot? Like, meaning you don't want to set up camp right where you would probably be hunting, right? Because you don't want to, and a blunt statement, you don't want to shit where you eat, right?
Fair.
So that would be one of the things. Like, is my camp too close to where I hunt, where it could, on the wrong wind, where my hunting would suck if, I was just back at camp or whatever, or the home base, whatever you're going to call it. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but yeah, that would be my focus. Just basically see what's in the area and then just be an opportunist. And that's something that I think would be weird if you were to take it like on how the average person hunts today, right? Like in that sort of scenario, you would kind of, you would almost want to be an opportunist to like, it didn't matter what it was, let's say if it was a whitetail, whether it be a buck, a doe, a fawn. A freaking, yeah, literally, you would take opportunity of that because you needed it. You wanted it to survive. And then if you flip that with today, it's like, obviously a fawn days, that's a,
we're in advanced society. You probably shouldn't be shooting a fawn.
Right. And I agree with that. I don't care what day and age it is.
And I've shot my fair share, probably more than my fair share. The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
To kind of bring just this little segment full circle is like, feeling a Doe Tag today is just like, I'm feeling a Doe Tag. That would be it. I got some cool footage next. Where's the big buck? But there, it wouldn't matter if it was, a 160 or, just a itty bitty old doe. You'd be just as happy, and you'd just be like, I just did something. Now, granted, is with a longbow instead of a air gun, but it is what it is.
I think about is I don't think like a native or someone that would be hunting this way would even consider the rack as like a higher form of trophy. I think it would be a higher form of utility. It'd be like, right. Oh, I can create 10 knives because knife handles out of 10 points. So the more points, the more utility. And the more main beam, the more utility. The bigger the rack, the more utility. It's not right. About because to be honest with you, when you're eating it and you're using it for a different purpose of creating other things, I don't think you would look at it the same way, because a rack would be a tool, not a trophy. They're not going to throw that trophy over the top of the camp and be like, yeah, I got a 160. They're going to be like sawing it up with a Clovis point. Like, let's make more knives. You know what I mean? Can you imagine watching a bunch of natives hacking on a 160-inch rack to make tools?
I mean, that's another thing that's like what's different about today, right? How much of the deer we actually use, right? Because if you go there in that native camp or whatever scenario you want to be in, almost everything. I mean, I don't know what they do with like the rib cage bones or whatever, because I haven't dug too deep into that. But like kind of like you said with the horns, and a lot of people do on their shows ate like certain organs, either because of fats or vitamins or something along those lines that could benefit people. But now, today, like hardly anyone, I think, honestly takes the heart and cuts it up and eats it. The fur or the hide, people skin it and it goes in the nearest dumpster or ditch or wherever you throw your stuff. And then, it'd be used to, I don't know, make clothes, shoes, gloves if it's wintertime. I don't know what it'd be used for, but just things get used differently. And I don't know. Did you already say your game plan on the big game?
There's only one game plan, baby. Knock it and rock it. That was my game plan. Spend as few calories as I could to kill the biggest animal possible. And hopefully you come on this trip practice, because I don't want to be using none of my long bolts, my arrows practicing. So I don't know. I just try to be a woodsman. If I found an area that I could sit and stalk, I think spot and stalk would be somewhat usable, but you got to think it from a calorie perspective. You wouldn't want to be burning a ton of calories like walking. So I'd want to find an ambush point and maybe make a blind or sit above something and try to hunt it that way. That would be my strategy. Find a good funnel and we'll sit and wait. So
you do more of the boots on the ground type scenario. I mean, you'd have to, but
no, I get on Onyx.
Yeah.
No, that'd be my strategy for big game. I'd be an opportunist, though. It wouldn't, regardless of rack size, regardless of species. I'm not worried about tags. And this is a interesting conversation too. They're back then, 200 years ago, 250 years ago. They're not thinking about conservation of the animal. They're thinking about conservation of themselves. Mm-hmm. So if you said, hey, this is the last whitetail fawn that's ever existed on Earth, somebody that's starving is going to say, well, now they're extinct. That is what's going to happen, because it's preservation of self over everything else. Whereas today we have a conservation model that is focused on conserving the animal. We're in such a good place with our food systems and our technology that we are focused on conservation, that even being able to focus on conservation is a privileged place, because these people are not focused about that in any way, shape, or form. Or at least I wouldn't be. I definitely wouldn't be. Would you? I mean, we're about eating.
Yeah. I mean, thank God we have the conservation movement that we have today. I mean, because obviously we're not all in this scenario, right? But
do you think there would be any trophy hunting? Would you be doing any trophy hunting?
That's what's crazy about today is that's all we we strive, all the keyboard warriors that are on all the online forums and especially freaking TikTok, saying a 5.5, like 150 or 160 isn't good conservation management. That's, I don't care who you are. 5.5 is a trophy by itself. A 160 is a trophy by itself, regardless of age. Regardless of that, back a few hundred people, or I don't know, probably 2 people ago.
What's that Joe Rogan joke? Like 2 people ago?
He said 300 years wasn't very long ago. He was like, that's like 3 people ago.
It's true.
Yeah. So basically what we're trying to say is that it wouldn't matter like what it scored. Like you wouldn't be thinking of it in that terms. And it's crazy to see how far it's come, right? Like how privileged we are as a society to actually worry about like, oh, hey, I'm going to try to kill this one specific deer this year, and we pass up all the does, we set out corn that we use our hardworking money to try to bait certain deer that only come out, it seems like at night, that we want to harvest. And we pass up on all these does and sometimes little smaller bucks, depending on what neighbor you are. And we go from there. And if you put that person that's, trying to get a scrap of meat at, let's say in the Canadian wilderness, you put them in that scenario and it's just like, dude, like, what are you doing? Stupid of you. So we got basically the easier said than done steps we would take to quote unquote survive out in the wilderness. So with all we talked about, Christian, how many days do you think you would survive realistically?
Canadian wilderness. How many arrows do I have is the real question.
Let's say you got a dozen arrows.
Dozen. I like to think that I would survive like more than 60 days, but Jordan, the dude on Alone, was such a hard dude, and he survived, I think, like 100 or something like that. I'd like to think multiple months, but when you're out there, I think the psychological battle of being alone, having to hunt for absolute everything, it would be hard to survive more than a few weeks. I think the average person is leaving it within a week, to be honest with you.
I think I might be one of those people just mentally, because I think we all need people, but I think mentally, like, I'd be checked out by like the first 3 or 4 days. And I think that would come back and bite me. Like, I would like to think I'm a strong-willed individual, but the second that, something goes wrong, that's like I don't know, my freaking shelter gets flooded out, or I'm wet and I'm cold,
Tarp flies away
one night and I'm just sitting there all PO'd. I'm like, I want to click that SOS button and get the hell out of there. So I really think that I would be probably a week, maybe 10 days. And realistically, I'd be out you, unless I was just had a crazy different mindset.
Or you had like a why. They're like, if you can survive 80 days, you're
if there's money on the line, or if like, your family's hanging off a cliff, last survive, family gets pulled up, just like, okay, so then I'll survive.
Let's bring this full circle. We long-winded about the survival. What's the moral of the story if you had to bring it all full circle? So
this is where it gets a little bit like a fine line that I keep catching myself on.
Got to play both sides of the fence.
You do have to play both sides of the fences today, right? So the conservation model we have today is much needed, right? I like having big bucks on camera. I like chasing big bucks, right? And there's a certain point where you get to that. I'm not saying I'm just a freaking absolute big buck killer, but some of the 100-inch 110 range bucks don't really excite me near as much. I'm probably not going to shoot on private, especially public. Depends on what time of the year. But we need the conservation rules. We need the methods. We don't need people to shoot fawns, obviously, because we're not in that scenario. But what I think would be good is to kind of take a look back, maybe take a step back on what we really need and what hunting is really about, right? Because today, you have probably the correct terminology for this, but like we're an over-marketed society, right? Like we have products being shoved in our face. Oh, you need Cineway to be able to be successful. Oh, you need this camo to be successful. Oh, you need the latest saddle hunting gear. Yeah, new bow. Oh my God, new bow. I mean, the only thing you would like probably need to be more successful is like, I don't know, add on a limb gear and like MMT arrows from Exodus. Like that's
it.
That's the baseline of what you absolutely need to be a big buck killer. But besides that, take all that other stuff, all this other information that we're about to give you in the next month, like I don't know, like stuff about the eyes, the ears, the taste, all that stuff. Like that's cool to know. That's great to know. But in all honesty, you don't need that. You just need to try to be the outdoorsman, the woodsman that I want to say your ancestors. I sound really hardcore when I say that. Your ancestors had to have. You don't need the newest bow. You can get it done with a 1970s model bow if you were good enough. So I think that's the moral of the story. We try to make it fun, the most interesting way we can to try to put it into perspective. Might have turned out, we might listen to this back and be like, we're not airing that. We don't know. What's your thoughts?
Just freaking enjoy it. Who gives a damn how other people hunt? I mean, we would hunt a whole lot differently if it was 200 years ago, but I think one thing I do admire today is people don't have to hunt today. So when people do, I would just I would just think about it in terms of people are doing it. I hope people are doing it for their enjoyment and for the right reasons. And it's not just something to do for people. And I think there are folks that it's a cultural thing and you just do it because it's something to do. I don't know. I don't think that's what hunting means to me, but I hope everybody gets to go out and just enjoy it and quit worrying what other people think. If you had to hunt for food, it'd be a lot different. Thank God we don't have to hunt for food these days.
Well, if someone gets a second term, we might be hunting for food.
Yeah, we're one election away from hunting for food, it sounds like, or buying our food from China, which you're probably already doing. But
China. Anyways,
enjoy it and don't overcomplicate it. It didn't used to be what it is today. You don't need new gear. Go out there and have some fun. That's what I would say. All right, so before we leave this episode, we're going to play you the Deer Science Month's trailer. This is going to be in front of all of the episodes we release over the next few weeks, actually 4 weeks. So with that, here comes Deer Science Month. Hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome to Deer Science Month.
The goal of this series is to break down the science behind the different senses of a white-tailed deer to make us better hunters.
We're going to be talking to some of the best deer biologists across the country about topics like deer vision, smell, hearing, taste, and we'll even throw in cool topics like, does culling deer actually work? The difference between CWD and EHD, and we'll talk about some GPS collar research. So anything you want to know about deer science and biology, hopefully we're going to cover it in this series. All right, thanks for listening to this wonky episode about Canadian plane crashes, hunting culture, what we would do in a survival scenario. Next week is Deer Science Month. We're kicking it off strong. So we will catch you guys in that episode. Bye.
Jesus loves you.
Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.